Welcome to this week's program. We've got a very special part of On the Land this week. We're going to be doing a special all about mental health. The idea being is that there's a lot of stress out there and there's a lot of heartache, and we're going to introduce you to some people who can make you recognise it. But that's later in the program. In just a moment, it's animal health prevention and cure. Obviously, it's going to be a very dry year, and there's problems with stock in a dry year.
Absolutely, yeah. It doesn't take a genius to look outside and see how dry it is underfoot and see how brown it can be when there's been no water hitting the ground. And correspondingly, obviously, the nutritional value of that sort of pasture is very, very low indeed. Very fibrous, no leaf, no sugars, no very, very poor nutrition. And it creates a situation that can cause some major welfare concerns, more major than anything else that's been hitting the headlines recently even. So it's a stressful enough and difficult enough situation for seasoned commercial farmers to deal with, and I really appeal to the small acreage farmers out there to just take heed of what I'm saying. And if it results in having to destock land, well then that's what needs to happen. And it would have been nicer to have been a little bit more forewarned and pre-planned before this stage even, but you know, they have to eat something, and when there's nothing to eat, bad stuff happens, you know. And
they don't look bad because there's a lot of wool on the sheep, for example.
Absolutely. Sheep are the number one problem that we see, especially in small lifestyle block farmers, and often it's because whether it's too much else going on at work or not enough handling facilities, but it's essential that you get a hand on sheep in particular. You really, things are hidden from view with fleece, even short amounts of fleece, and you really do have to palpate or feel over the top line, over the back line of the sheep, over the short rib area, and you know that there's just no way around it. You have to do that.
That leads on to other problems.
Of course. Well, poor nutrition. If the animals do get through a tight space nutritionally during the summer, we often do see secondary issues coming out of drought conditions or dry conditions, in particular parasite problems, which I know we've talked about recently. But the stress of nutritional stress of the summer can result in severe clinical parasitism, even in older animals coming out of a stressed period.
Shade and water.
Shade, number one, and it's more hard to come by now than I'd like. I mean, in the dairy scenario, we've had lots and lots of tree lines cut down to make way for centre pivots and things, and the corresponding loss of shade and shelter is tragic, I think. And I think as far as dry stock farming in particular, it's one of the biggest welfare issues that we have in midsummer. Is you know, shade is a real requirement, and water. I don't know why, but we still have this scenario where people sometimes think that the water requirements for sheep in particular, I don't know why, are lower or negligible, and although we may be surprised at how little free water sheep need to drink when they're eating lush pasture, in conditions like we're seeing out there at the moment, it's just a no-brainer. They need fresh water all the time. Yeah.
Now, tell me about bulls and hooves.
Yep, so it is a time of year, the summertime, where we do tend to see lots of quite severe lameness in bulls, or large bovine creatures, steers and things. And we think it's because we end up with very, very dry underfoot conditions, hard conditions, and we get lots of cracking in the toe region of the hoof, and very, very common to see what we call toe abscesses, or an accumulation of pus right in the very toe of the hoof, particularly the forelimbs, the front legs, and it can result in a painful animal that can hardly bear weight. It's a big undertaking. Often we have to drop these animals down to actually deal with it adequately and drain the pus away. So it is a time to maybe, if you can detect mobility or locomotion issues that are quite subtle, it's better to nip things in the bud a bit early, perhaps with some veterinary advice, a bit of antibiotics before we actually get an abscess accumulation really, and make sure hooves are trimmed adequately if they need to be.
Dick, thank you very much indeed. We're counting down to our special on mental health on the land, but in just a moment Jim Greerson's here. Jim, a frost.
Yeah, back on the 5th of November we were served a bad blow, Rob, and we're now starting to see the significance of that event. In fact, it was a big frost that morning across the South Island especially, but there was a lot of low wind chill factor at the same time that I think has influenced the end result. And the end result is that a number of crops, fruit crops especially, vines, are in trouble. They've been badly hit, and so what does it really mean? It really means we've lost quantity, but not necessarily quality. But there's some significant damage around various parts of the South Island, and those growers unfortunately have affected quite badly.
So they'll just lose a season, he says.
Yes. And maybe if we don't grow shoots and get the bud initiation and all that sort of thing in recovery time sorted out by the end of the season, they could lose a little bit of production again the following year.
It's cruel, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's we used to have 20 years ago. Used to have frosts 19th, 20th, 21st of October. You could almost bet your arm on it, and they've shifted. I mean, if we talk about climate change, this is a real good example of what the climate has done. And now the 5th and 6th and 7th of November is one that we'd love to get past. 2008 was our last time that we had a real nailing throughout the South Island and part of Hawke's Bay, and that was on the 6th of November, and this is on the 5th of November, so Guy Fawkes Day went up with a bang.
Yes, that went through my mind actually. Frost, I guess, it leads me on in a very strange way to the frozen berries.
Yeah, well, a good thing that you brought that up, Rob, because there's a lot of issue out there in terms of Hep A being contracted by people who have consumed frozen berries. Now, and obviously that is true, there's a number of examples of that, but we haven't been clearly identified where those berries have come from. But one thing I can say to the New Zealand consumer, if they wish to go to the supermarket and buy their berries, frozen berries, just look at where it's come from, and if it's origin New Zealand, grab it, buy it. It may be 30 cents a kilogram dearer, but you're going to buy life, and you're going to buy what you want to buy. And I think that's a really important, sort of home message. And of course, right now is the beginning of the fresh berry fruit season for New Zealand. So we've got strawberries coming on stream now, we've got raspberries just around the corner, and we've got black currants and gooseberries and what have you, only a couple of weeks away. So it really does tell us that why the heck don't we buy them through this part of the year, put them in our own freezers, and then use them later on in the winter if we need.
Because I heard the guy on the radio, and he said he imports 3,000 tonnes of fruit from China.
Yeah, huge amount of fruit, massive. Having said that, there are a number of companies that got very good New Zealand berry fruit and good mixed berry fruit. Sue John, if I may use a commercial name.
Of course you may.
It is one, and look, if you see that brand out in the New Zealand supermarkets, and there's plenty of it about, for goodness sake, buy it. People say, oh, well, it's 30 cents a packet dearer. So what? I mean,
you're not going to get hepatitis A from it.
It's there for a reason, because it's got quality, it's had the traceability, it's done all the things
that we talk about all the time.
Absolutely. So those consumers, get off and get that and enjoy it with your ice cream and cream or whatever it might be, and they'll have a healthy life.
Now, reading labels, speaking of accountability.
Yeah, unfortunately I'm involved with 3 quite large projects at the moment that the growers picked up either the wrong can or did not read the label correctly, and they've got crop loss, major crop loss in some cases. No names, no pactoral, but all I'm really saying to growers and farmers and their farm workers, for goodness sake.
Yeah, farm workers especially, because
pick up the pack, read the jolly thing, and make sure what you're meant to go out there and spray for aphid, you don't put on a herbicide or vice versa, because it won't work. And unfortunately, I have to say, and I've mentioned this before, Rob, unfortunately, packaging and some of the manufacturers' companies' packaging is very similar between fungicides, insecticides and herbicides. And you can mistakenly pick them up out of a chemical shed and apply them incorrectly. Having said that, if you really take a good look at the label, it resolves that problem. And of course the grower is meant and the farmer is meant to have them stored, herbicides in one area, fungicides in another area, insecticides in another area. Now it's not hard, but it's very hard to convince a grower that may have a multi-million-dollar loss that he picked up the wrong can and sprayed it onto his crop. It's not good. And they are real.
Very expensive
They
mistake.
are real. I mean, oh, absolutely. And it doesn't last 1 year normally either, unfortunately. You can carry on to the next season.
Jimmy, thank you very much indeed, and a Merry Christmas to you.
Compliments to you.
We've got more for you on the program straight after the break.
Be Active begins here in the cold, clean, unpolluted southern oceans of New Zealand. Be Active amino acid biostimulant, natural, 100% pure, manufactured from healthy deep sea fish from sustainable New Zealand fisheries. New Zealand's Be Active amino acid biostimulant, the way the world is growing. Working with nature, good for the plant, good for the planet. Now that's growing for good.
I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
We're living on a planet facing almost insurmountable challenges. Challenges we have to face sooner rather than later. The world needs our energy. She needs our ideas, our passion. It's up to us to change things, make a positive change to the planet, to feed the world, to protect the future, to live well, to be the generation that will make a change. Join us.
John, the markets, how are they looking?
Well, we're coming to the end of the first 6 months of the season and we've got 2 more auctions. We've got a North Island auction this week and then a double to finish the season on the finish this part of the season on the 17th. The market in New Zealand sense here has held up very well actually, and a lot of that has been on the back of reduced supplies, especially in the South Island, and you can't help but think that relates back to, especially in the Canterbury area, a lot of the capital stock that went out or was killed because of the drought conditions.
And continue to do so.
Yeah, and so it's making it a bit difficult to forecast volumes, just you know, what's going to come on when. But what we do know, there'll be a lot of wool on the market in the second 6 months, so starting January. So the supply patterns have certainly changed in the South Island. In the north, not so much pronounced, but it makes for interesting times.
Which is a nice way of saying it's hell out there at the moment.
So the international marketplace, a bit quiet at the moment, but we'd suspect that there'll be renewed interest into the new year. There'll be a pickup in activity, which should help the market levels.
The dollar's helping a wee bit because it's sort of mid-60s instead of mid-80s.
Well, it has helped a lot. The currency has helped a lot. Yeah, as you said, it peaked at 88 and now it's around 60, 66 and a half as we speak. So a lot of that gain has gone back to the farmer, and we'd like to think that it stays around these levels, if you know, and may even retrace a bit, and that's all good news for the NZ cent price for the grower. So there's a few interesting things coming up talking about currency. You've got the Reserve Bank decision this week. Will he cut or not? And then you have the US decision on their interest rates on the 17th of December, and that could have ramifications for our currency as well. So as usual, it's, you know,
It's walking on eggshells for you guys.
You've got to bear these things in mind.
Because you're sort of basically working the futures in a very strange way.
Well, you're always selling wool forward, you know,
Yeah.
and you've got positions to, obviously you're taking positions all the time, so it's what you're really talking about is your net position, whether you're long or short or whatever. And of course, if you're looking at a dollar that could decline something like 4 or 5%, obviously you don't want to be too short of the commodity because it will have some impact on the NZ cent price. So you've always got these things to consider as far as the future goes. But
Dry year, what's the yield like?
yields have come down, reflecting that, which is often happens. You know, the fleece doesn't get washed out as much, so there's more dust, if you like, and vegetable matter that stays in the fleece. But the wool coming on next year will be, the colour won't be so good, that's a seasonal thing, but we've been pretty happy with the wool quality to date. The yield is a factor, especially if you're scouring the wool, but the quality has been good to date.
Because the other thing that I remember is when we suddenly get a dry patch and you get breaks in the wool because the sheep suffer.
Well, the first thing that is affected when an animal's stressed is the fibre, and you're right, is that break. And so it's interesting, you can tell very, very quickly just how well an animal's, you know, nutrition, how well the animal's doing just by looking at the staple. And so obviously we'd prefer that
There's no stress.
Yeah, but you know.
So to briefly looking forward, its presentation is going to be the key?
Yeah, but we're heading into that time where animals have been subject to more weather factors, and generally speaking the colour won't be as good. That's a seasonal factor, happens all the time, especially from down south, in Southland and around. So there's a lot of wool to come on the market, so the market will be tested probably through January and February, just supply driven. So our job's to get out there and get as much of it sold as we can, and to, you know, keep things moving and keep the values right if we can.
John, thank you very much, and a Merry Christmas to you.
Same to you.
We're counting down towards our special on the land. It's all about mental health and knowing what the symptoms are and knowing how to get around them. But in just a moment, we're going to be talking to John O'Malley. John, a couple of the things that have happened recently. One is that a farmer's been put in jail for breaking tails, and then we've now got SAFE putting in huge advertisements in a Great Britain newspaper saying that blood all over the milk. Have we been driven, do you think, to sort of to the edge?
I think Rob, firstly, we live in a different world now. You know, you can't pick your nose in public if you're a politician. Someone's going to stick it on the web. You'll be being filmed. And so we live in a world where information is freely available and freely spread and easy to spread, and it doesn't necessarily have to be dealing with the essence, the accurate core of the thing. It can simply be an incident which is then made out to present an essence. Now, I don't think, my knowledge of farmers, and I dealt with a lot of farmers over the years, is I haven't met one yet that isn't concerned about his stock and that isn't concerned about the land that he or she is farming, right? And so I think that there will always be rogue elements, and there will always be a risk now that they will be presented as the core. And I think that's where groups like Federated Farmers now are going to have to be thinking. And I was watching the thing where the calves were maltreated, and I don't think in anyone's interpretation they were maltreated, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so
cowardly done by hidden cameras, but that's my opinion.
Well, look, you know, I mean, yeah, and the tactics of how it was filmed and that's another conversation. But I also think, you know, what makes a person who wouldn't normally do this do it anyway? You know, are they under a lot of pressure, or a lot of stress? Are they under economic pressure? You know, the cost of labour in the meat industry is going down as the profits of the owners of those industries are going up. I mean, these are simple, real facts. You know, and so, but you know, the one that I think drives it all is the cost of land. I think that's the biggest threat to safe production of meat and milk, and to some extent wool in New Zealand, because as the cost of land's going up, it is forcing the producer to extract every last bit out of it. And that means that that concern they have for the land has to be counterbalanced against the pressure coming from the bank. And if we don't rethink this question and come up with a better answer, it is going to continue in the food and creating problems with things like food intolerances, and it is going to drive families out of farming and move all farm ownership to the corporate sector. And then we will have lost any concern, because the corporate sector is only happening. Well, of course it's happening, and it's a creep that all of us who are concerned about farming don't like. You don't like it, do you?
No, I mean, because to me, I'm old-fashioned enough to say that, the family farm.
Exactly, but you see, there was a Victorianism in the old days that said, well, the sons stay on the farm and the daughters marry a farmer, and if she didn't, well, then she'll just have to go and do something else.
He will look after her.
And he'll look after her. Yeah. Now, we now live in an environment, I think, where, and I think it's an appropriate environment, where succession planning has to be a lot more sophisticated than that. Where, if one son's going to stay on the farm and you've got two daughters and another son, well, he basically owns a quarter of a farm when it starts, and he's got to work out how to get the other 3/4 paid for at the market price. And I don't know the solution, but I think government, federated farmers, SAFE, anybody who's interested in it needs to get around the table, and they have to start talking about how do we stop the move to the corporate sector with land? How do we stop foreign ownership? How do we keep it so that people who care for stock and care for the farm, right, and care for the land and care for its long-term production are the people that are still running them in 100 years from now? Because if that doesn't happen, it will influence our food. And I'll tell you how. It's very simple. Breast milk, human breast milk, is the most environmentally responsive stuff you'll ever come across, right? If the mother is highly stressed, the hormones go out of her adrenal glands into the milk, into the baby. This does two things: stunts growth, right, and makes it a whinging pain in the bum. Now, if you think of the environment where the mother might be stressed, if you go back again, I'm always going back to us in the African savannah, right?
Yep, absolutely.
It would have been at a time when food was under challenge and when there was major threat, right? So a small baby doesn't require as much food. A small baby, right, a whingy baby doesn't get lost and unnoticed. So you see, it's in our biology to reflect our environment and our food. Now, if you stress a cow, that same stuff goes into those same hormones that affect a human baby are there to affect a calf, but of course they affect us. Now, if we want to keep people in our market, we shouldn't forget about volume, work out how to make the best quality top-end product. And that does mean things like you do seriously have to think about, have my cows got shelter? Are my cows stressed? All of that. Now, if you've got the bank on the other hand going, I don't care about that, you have to pay me this much in a month or we'll foreclose on you. Because we know banks, they're good people and they really care. Right? And Santa Claus will come on the 25th
John,
to 6 billion people.
Thank you very much indeed. Straight after the break, we've got our special On the Land program about mental health.
Be Active begins here in the cold, clean, unpolluted southern oceans of New Zealand. Be Active amino acid biostimulant, natural, 100% pure, manufactured from healthy deep sea fish from sustainable New Zealand fisheries. New Zealand's Be Active amino acid biostimulant, the way the world is growing. Working with nature, good for the plant, good for the planet. Now that's growing for good.
I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
We're living on a planet facing almost insurmountable challenges. Challenges we have to face sooner rather than later. The world needs our energy. She needs our ideas, our passion. It's up to us to change things, make a positive change to the planet, to feed the world, to protect the future, to live well, to be the generation that will make a change. Join us.
This On the Land special is proudly brought to you by New Zealand Wool Services. Greetings, I'm Rob Cope-Williams and I'm talking to you at the moment because I want to put a face on depression and the will to end it all because it is too much to face. I also want to introduce you to some people who can describe how to recognise it, how to get on top of it, and how you can recover and become somebody who is leading a normal life again. It may not be you yourself, it could be somebody who's in your immediate family or somebody whom you are close to. But I can assure you that the first thing you've got to do is, like being an alcoholic, is you've got to understand in yourself that you've got a problem before you can start healing yourself. Here's my story. 15th of October 2014. I'm driving down St John's Road in Christchurch. There's a very strong southerly wind and the trees, the big tall pine trees, are bending. And I put out to the universe a plea. I said, please can one of those trees blow over, land on my car and take me out. I hadn't wanted to commit suicide. I'd thought about it, I'd planned it, but I didn't want my family to have the stigma of their father or grandfather having committed suicide. But what I did, and what I realised I had been doing, was I was putting it out to the universe saying, please, a tree land on my roof of my car and take me out, because that's an accident. Or a truck come through an intersection, a red light, take me out. An accident, I could handle. Suicide, no. But what I hadn't realised is how deeply I was in trouble. So, what is depression? And how do we recognise it?
Well, the physical symptoms are a corollary to some extent of chronic stress. So the person will show up with gut trouble, they'll show up with poor appetite, they'll show up with low libido, they'll show up with poor sleep, and then as it physically shows up in the body as pain, it is what shows up with chronic use of musculature. So they'll have tight upper shoulders, they'll have base of the skull here, the suboccipital muscles will often be tight, and quite commonly they'll have an intermittent low back pain that comes and goes. In fact, all these symptoms will come and go depending on their emotional state to some extent and the stresses that are on them.
Depression, as we've heard, is a collection of symptoms. Occasionally, it can start very abruptly. Like occasionally, hear a story of a person saying, I woke up one morning and I was completely different to the day before. But by far the most common story is that people will be struggling over weeks, months, sometimes even years with some symptoms until they get bad enough that they realise something is definitely wrong now. So quite commonly it does start with difficulty sleeping, not enjoying. People can carry on their normal activities, they can go on the farm, do all their normal things, but their wife's saying, why don't you come out tonight? No, I can't be bothered going out tonight. And it's often dropping off of all the extra events in life rather than your core work, which people are often remarkably successful at continuing to do. But they'll also be finding it's harder to get up, to go to work. The motivation's not there, they're not enjoying it in the way that they were. And this can take, as I said, weeks or months before it gets to the point of them really realising that something's definitely not right.
The thing that brings someone into our practice or to go and see a GP or to seek some help in general is some way down the line from when things actually started to happen. And part of what I would want to do with someone is kind of track that back, because the issues may have started years ago. What you may have been seeing might just actually be part of what happened earlier on in someone's life. Without knowing what it is that they're trying to deal with, they're just going to try and cope with this in the best way that they possibly can. And what we often find is that when people are trying to cope with something, they're using the strategies, but they stop working for them. And that's when they start to get into distress. The stress that they're experiencing is kind of outweighing how they're able to cope with this, and then they're going to start feeling it. What often happens then is that because we're feeling distress, we're going to try and find whatever ways that we can to reduce that distress. In my practice, it's more, and I'm sure this reflects other psychologists and counsellors as well, it's not often, or it's more often the case that people are coming in wanting help to try and feel better rather than think better. So they're wanting to seek help about how they feel.
So, obviously, as far as my story is concerned, I didn't want to talk to anybody about it. People were trying to work out why I was so busy that I wasn't answering my phone, why I wasn't ringing them back, even close friends and associates who would suggest that I would go to a meeting with them or that I would go to the hotel and have a quiet beer and a chat. There was always a reason or an excuse for me not to do it. In my heart, I was pleading for somebody to say, Rob, I think you should go to the doctor. Now, I've told you that I did go to the doctor, and what I didn't tell you was that when I did make that decision, a huge load came off my shoulders. The realization, in fact, that when he went through the list of 11 points which indicate depression, I had 9 of them. And he said any 3 is an alarm bell, which is very, very bad. So why don't we want to talk about it?
I think there's a number of reasons, and this is just my clinical experience. This is what I've noticed over the years. There's a number of reasons people don't talk about it. I think one of the most common one is they don't recognise it. They don't actually realise that that's what's happening with them, because it has quite an insidious onset often. It's a build-up generated by the situation the person's in over a chronic period of time. And the other side of it is cultural. And that cultural is different for men and for women, but the cultural component is, you know, we're the tough rugby racing bear country. You know, our ideal man, the one we've been brought up as the bloke whose ideal is the Anzac, you know, this tough bloke who holds it inside and just gets on with it and that sort of thing. So it's seen as a bit of a taboo sometimes to talk about it. But I would say that cultural grip is loosening, and people are a lot happier to talk about it than they were, say, when I first came into practice 30 years ago.
Stigma around mental health is large. There's a lot of work that's been done to try and reduce that, and a lot of campaigns to try and reduce that. But there's 2 sides to it. There's not only the public aspect of stigma around mental health issues or a whole range of issues in life, including, say, sexuality, but there's a self-stigma, which often comes in, that if I say something about this, then I'm going to be perceived in a negative way. You know, I don't like how I feel if this is happening to me. I'm the guy or girl or woman or whoever who copes with this stuff. And if I'm not coping, then there's something wrong with me.
Well, I think all mental illness, there's been some stigma. People can perceive it as a weakness. You know, I'm a strong person, I can cope with stresses, I can cope with difficulties. But if it was just a response to stress, we probably wouldn't call it a medical condition. Sometimes it does happen in response to stress, but quite often it can happen for inadequate reasons. Now, that may partly because it runs in families, and a whole variety of other factors can contribute to who develops depression and who doesn't develop depression. But I think it is that sense that I'm strong, I should be able to cope with everything myself. and a reluctance, I think, to seek help for something which can be vague at one level. Although usually people, I know something's wrong, I just don't know what it is that's wrong.
I think at first people don't recognise it. They just sort of meet this resistance, like, I don't want to talk about this, but they may not know exactly what it is. To be able to turn around and say, I'm experiencing some self-stigma around my mental health issues is actually something that's quite a high-level thing to do. You know, you have to be aware of what's going on. When someone's really struggling with something and they're in the middle of it, you could liken it to being like a tug of war, that they've got their hands on the rope fighting this thing, and that's where all of their energy and their focus is invested. It's not in taking a broader perspective or awareness of what's going on in their life. So that makes it very hard to see aspects of, say, self-stigma at play around at that point. We're just trying to do the best we can to almost stay alive in that situation.
So, with my life story, as far as depression is concerned, I've got to the stage where, yeah, I recognised it and I'm getting some treatment and I'm getting some help. The interesting thing is that I'm now talking about it very openly. And I'm absolutely astounded how many people will say, yeah, I've been there, I've been in that dark area, I came through it because I went and got some help. So basically, how realistic is it as a number? Is it huge?
Depression is a reasonably common disorder. Over a lifetime, the estimates are at least 20, 30, possibly even 40% of people may have a time of depression at some stage in their life. It's not very common in children, but it becomes much more common during adolescence. Probably at any time in the population, 3, 4, 5% of people will be currently suffering from depression. Some evidence that Christchurch post-earthquakes, it's a little bit higher than 5%. And then there will be people clearly who have had depression, varying degrees of recovery from depression, because so often depression is a long-term condition rather than something just happens to you and you get over it. Often it takes quite a period of time to make a full recovery.
This On the Land special is proudly brought to you by New Zealand Wool Services. I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
We're living on a planet facing almost insurmountable challenges. Challenges we have to face sooner rather than later. The world needs our energy. She needs our ideas, our passion. It's up to us to change things, make a positive change to the planet, to feed the world, to protect the future, to live well, to be the generation that will make a change. Join us.
This On the Land special is proudly brought to you by New Zealand Wool Services. Now, therapy is something which I always ignored or walked away from and said that I certainly wasn't going to go to any counsellor. I would scoff when the news would say that counselling was being administered to people who had been through some sort of a trauma. When I went to my doctor, he told me in no uncertain terms that if I was going to heal myself, I had to be realistic and to go to a counsellor. I did. And I can recommend that you, or anyone you know, takes it on the chin, depending, it doesn't matter what their views were. They need to learn to retrain or reprogram their mind, because that is what counsellors do. Basically, you are starting to heal yourself, because no one else can heal you apart from you. They can assist you, but they can't do it for you.
I think it's important for people to really be open to looking for some help when it comes to dealing with problems. No matter what kind of sphere of life you look at, people are willing to put up their hand to accept help with something that they don't know enough about to be able to fix themselves, whether it's a plumbing issue or an electrical issue or a problem with their car, whether that's seeking some help on farm management or pasture management. We're kind of, in some spheres of life, we're happy to say, hey, I need some help with this. When it comes to emotional or mental health, we're really reluctant to do that. And that does come back to the stigma aspect. But if we looked at it in a way that says, here's just another aspect of my life that I'm going to get some expert help with, then we're going to be more open to doing that. One of the things that really stops people from seeking help is the idea that they should know how to fix it themselves. I can fix every other damn thing in my life, why can't I fix this? And actually, the irony of that is it's sometimes those attempts to fix what's going on inside them as if it was a practical problem actually makes it worse. And that's where myself and my colleagues and other professionals come in to try and help someone to change how they're going about trying to fix it. You know, the skills are good, it's just unfortunately one of those situations where it just backfires.
I think the first thing on recognising in yourself or family member or a working colleague is to go along and see your general practitioner is the best step one. And I think even identifying it, getting a name for it, understanding what it is, can be helpful and may be sufficient for a few people. There's two main options for straightforward depression. One of the antidepressant drugs. The most commonly used in our community would probably be fluoxetine and citalopram, or one of the psychotherapies. And for first attempt at treatment, there may not be much in it, but some people will have a much stronger preference for one, or maybe a bias. I don't want to take drugs, or bias against counsellors, and I think you can often go with that in the first instance for mild to moderate depression and try something. 30, 40, 50% of the time, the first treatments that's tried will work. But if that doesn't work, there's still a range of other options that continue to try. And I think that's where the GP is vital with coordinating. Is this person really improving to the extent that we would expect?
I joke with my clients often and say, well, hey, you know, when they come and see me and they're sitting on the couch in front of me, I say, well, you know, I'm the last door on the right. You know, I'm the bit that the person that someone comes to when they've tried everything else. Unfortunately, the situation also means that once someone does get to be sitting in front of somebody else talking about their problems, it's almost saying that, hey, unfortunately what you've been doing hasn't been working. But that's not to say that the person's been working extraordinarily hard to try and sort out their situation, fix themselves, do whatever they can to get themselves out of this mess. It's just that now it's time to get some help for that. And it's hard to put your hand up. Coming into therapy, counselling, is launching into the unknown. There's uncertainty in there, and we're going to be very careful around that. In fact, there's a lot of anxiety that comes with that. You know, who is this person? What are we going to talk about? If I'm feeling bad now, am I going to be feeling worse once I start to, you know, discuss the stuff and open up? Most people's experience, though, is that the old adage of a problem shared is a problem halved actually is true. And as soon as we start to put our hand up to having an issue, to openly discussing what's going on, then there is that phenomena of other people coming along and saying, hey, I've been through that as well. My story is similar to you. When people do that in a very, very public way, it kind of draws people out who are attracted to that, who want to be able to share their experience, and that can be the start of that person getting some help for what's going on as well.
I think it's also important because quite often people come in and the doctor says, are you feeling better? And they say, yeah, I'm feeling much better, thank you. That's the beginning of the conversation, not the end of the conversation, because people say, I'm feeling better than when I was really bad. Actually, I'm not feeling better, right? I'm just feeling better than when I was at my worst. And if you don't carry on the conversation, so I think it's often useful to ask, so if you put yourself on 1 to 10 and 10's your old normal self, where would you be? Oh, I'm only 3 out of 10, but I'm much better than I was, and I'm grateful for being better than I was. But I think that's an indication the treatments are only working in part, and one may need to rethink if it's an antidepressant, the dose, or should you change antidepressant, or have you had the right sort of therapy? Should it be a combination? And there's a series of options which are available for people over time.
Depression to me is very much like a drought. It sneaks up on you, and even though the green grass may look as though it's looking great, it's very, very short, and there's nothing there for your stock to eat. Let me put it this way. During the major earthquake in February, I lost 16 of my workmates, and I went through obvious huge amounts of grief. I came out the other side, I thought. It had been very, very hard. I was sobbing a lot, I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping, I didn't want to know anybody. But I sort of got through it, I thought. But I hadn't. The interesting thing was that I was kidding myself that I was okay. I was turning a blind eye to the fact that I would walk out of my studio, for example, climb into my car, burst into tears and drive aimlessly around Christchurch because I felt absolutely useless. I felt as though I was worthless. I was just going through the motions of life. And that was why I wanted a tree to land on my car or a truck to take me out.
It certainly can sneak up, and again, whereas some people, maybe a third, the first treatment we try works really well, and inside the month people say, I'm so much better, I'm nearly back to my old self. But probably for 2/3, there's some ongoing symptoms, you've got to refine the treatment, you've got to think again as to how do we really get this person back to their old self, rather than just accept being better than bad.
Absolutely, it seems to sneak up on us. If we go back to what I said before around often the issues start a long time before it becomes a problem. As we start to struggle, we're going to start using whatever ways we can to deal with this, to cope with this. That can often mean, the social withdrawal, pulling back on things, and when we pull back on things, we often pull back on really important aspects of life. Human beings are social animals, and that's where we seek out contact generally as a first port of call to get some safety and some comfort in our life. So when you think, I don't want to face this stuff, I don't want to deal with it, they're going to see that there's something wrong with me, that my little secret is going to get revealed, and I don't want that. What tends to happen is we start to kind of wind up our coping strategies, do more of the things that aren't working for us in an attempt to try and sort out our situations. And that makes sense, because no one's going to say, hey, I'm really struggling right now, I'm going to just put down the things that really have worked for me in other times in my life and pick up the stuff over here. And we'll just take what has worked for us and try to do more of it. More social withdrawal, more drinking, more sleeping longer than is needed, getting busy into other things, trying to occupy ourselves, eating unhealthily. These are the things that sort of start to show up in people's lives when we start to struggle with things.
Nutrition is important because we are made up of components of vitamins and minerals and fats and proteins, and often when you're depressed you don't have an appetite to eat, so it's equally very, very important to try and, whilst you might not have an appetite, just try and eat some good food, because food is important for creating and the byproduct or the starting products of your neurotransmitters. And whilst depression can't be diagnosed through a blood test, we can do some blood tests that can recognise if there are vitamin D issues, are there zinc issues, are there magnesium issues, are there B vitamin issues. So I'd firstly be looking at getting a diet that's just a basic way of eating. We've become quite complicated with how we eat with processed foods. If you look at what's in a processed food, it's incredibly complicated. There's a lot of chemicals in there. You want to get back to basics, like how your grandmother ate, with good protein sources, good fat sources, vegetables, salads and fruits, just to get a good rounded balance of those basic macro and micronutrients in.
If the lifestyle's not working, absolutely. But it's based on the context. At times in our life, whatever lifestyle we have it works fine. But when we change situations in our life, if we increase the stress and pressures in our life, how we've been living may stop working, and at that point we do need to look at what we can do differently. If we've been working really long hours or we've been under a lot of pressure, there needs to be some aspects of focusing on making sure we get enough sleep so that we don't get fatigued, because that can often be the thing that will start to push our tolerances and our ability to deal with what life is throwing at us over the edge. It's more about, I think, maintaining good lifestyle habits, and the sort of big four that I focus on with people are diet, sleep, exercise, and doing things that are meaningful and having meaningful interactions in one's life. And if we all did that, then we're all probably going to be better off for it.
We need a holiday because it takes you out of that fight-flight response. It allows your body to go back into a more relaxed state, and that means that the pressure's not on the systems that are now under strain, and therefore the body can recover. It has an innate capacity to heal itself, providing the pressures aren't on it. And every once in a while, a bit of pharmacological assistance helps, in the form of medications. And sometimes if a person can't take a holiday or can't take a break or can't change the situation, that's the only way to hold things together. I guess from our perspective in the natural healing game, we would argue the best thing is to try and change the triggers. And a holiday is part of that process. It's getting out there and it's also reconnecting with family and friends and the things you like to do, and taking you away from the things that are actually tipping you up.
So, as far as I'm concerned, there's several points that I'd like to really stress now. Firstly, you're going to hide it from everybody. Secondly, you aren't going to talk about it. You're going to go within yourself. And thirdly, you can really only heal yourself, but first you've got to admit that you're in trouble. I did all three. I hid it. I didn't talk about it, but I did go and get some help, and I can assure you that life is very, very worth going and getting that help. And now, finally, a quick word from John Dawson from New Zealand Wool Services, who made all this possible.
We're very pleased to be able to do a very small thing to enable a greater awareness of depression. Personally, I think depression's very misunderstood in today's life, and if we can do something to help people understand it more, that's great. So I just hope that you enjoy the program and take a lot from it. Thank you very much.
This special On the Land program was proudly brought to you by New Zealand Wool Services.